And we live, as we all know, in a society that seems to simply ooze sex. It's there in popular music, magazines, advertising, and it's still, as a student called Heather explained in her email, generally the case that women are objectified and heterosexual males given a sense of entitlement to female sexuality. Her concern was for a friend who'd come out as asexual and found she suffered hostility. Asexuality, Heather wrote, is not a choice. It is not the same as choosing to be celibate. Well, she was keen for us to discuss the phenomenon and ask why it causes such a problem. Well, Lexi Hudson was the asexual representative at her student union in York. She joins us from there. Susie Godson, of course, is still with us. But Lexi, how do you define asexuality?
Well, Jenny, I would define asexuality as a distinct lack or absence of sexual attraction. So for an asexual person, sex is either not a priority at all, or they just kind of feel a bit indifferent about it.
Now, Susie, how would it differ from low libido? I mean, a lot of people might say they have a low libido.
Well, there's a condition called hyperactive sexual desire disorder, and that is, has very many of the same characteristics in terms of no interest in sex, no erotic fantasies, etc. But the difference is that it is generally marked by distress. The person is distressed about it. It's also marked by the fact that the person would previously have been, sexually active or interested in sex, and also that they have an underlying sexual orientation. And I think the query about asexuality is that there is no real sexual orientation because they're not attracted to either gender.
Lexi, at what point did you realise it applied to yourself?
Well, I didn't stumble across the name for it until Freshers' Week of university, but I did always suspect that something was going on sort of around the teenage years when all my friends started talking about sex and who they kind of fancied sexually, and I just had no idea what to say because we just weren't on the same level. But I just naturally presumed it was something wrong with me because everyone else was feeling so differently. I thought that there was a problem with me, some kind of neurosis that had to be fixed.
So how did you come out?
I came out after reading, quite ironically, the old definition of asexuality on the York Student Union website. And the more I read, the more I connected the dots and thought, oh my goodness, this is what I am. This is a valid identity. And it was such a relief that I kind of came out immediately via text to my parents and to a handful of close friends, just because that's who I am. I feel like if there's something very big that's a part of me, I kind of don't want to keep it hidden away for that long. Otherwise, I feel like I'm committing some sort of lie of omission, if you will.
What response did you get? Because Heather was obviously worried that her friend faced hostility.
I was very lucky. Everyone has been so supportive and welcoming, even if they don't quite understand it completely themselves. Although I did face a certain amount of scepticism and a bit of doubt, a kind of tenuous, but how do you know if you haven't tried it sort of thing? And that was a bit annoying, to be honest.
I won't ask you how you knew if you hadn't tried it then. But why might it cause hostility, Lexi?
I think people just struggle with the idea. We live in a very progressive society. We've come a long way in terms of, realising that there are different types of sexual orientation other than just straight. But the idea that there can also be no sexual orientation whatsoever, I think people really feel a bit stumped by that. And especially as, in society we're constantly told that sex is this sort of biological need, this primordial urge that everyone has, and that it's kind of the ultimate expression of our humanity. I think when you suddenly confront someone with the idea that actually I have no desire for sex whatsoever, I find it quite weird and repulsive. People just don't know what to do with that.
Now, I know that since coming out, you have had a relationship with a man who was not asexual. How did that work?
We just talked a lot, very openly, about what I was comfortable with. I was very clear about where my boundaries were. And we just kind of enjoyed a non-sexual relationship for about 5 months, where we just focused on the romantic side of things and just, spending time together without doing anything sexual.
So, Lexi, sorry, Susie, I apologise, you poor love got a cough. I was going to hand you over one of my cough sweets because I know how awful it is when you get into one of those. It's happened to me. But I know you were interested in the idea of consent in asexual relationships with someone who is not asexual?
I mean, I think, again, the whole idea of asexuality, it falls across a spectrum. So, for example, there's like non-libidoists who don't believe that asexuals should have any sexual feelings or should masturbate. And then there is a spectrum of people where they are asexual, they identify as that, but they have relationships, or they want to have children, for example. In Anthony Bogart's research, he's one of the kind of key researchers in this area. He identified that 33% of asexuals were in a long-term relationship, and another 11% had had at least one long-term relationship. And of those, they were having a sexual frequency of about 0.2 times a week, which is low compared to an average of 1.2 times a week. But that does work out at about sort of 10 times a year, which is borderline sexless relationships. But, if you are an asexual, that's a confusing issue. It's a confusing issue. Are you having sex because you want to or because you have to? And I think, as Lexi has quite rightly pointed out, any relationship between a sexual person and an asexual person there has to be hugely open lines of communication in order to negotiate those issues.
Well, Susie Godson and Lexi Hudson, thank you both very much indeed for being in touch, and I hope that's been helpful to Heather and her friend.